we'll get that started. All right. Well, again, welcome to the City of Chico's Post-Construction Standards Plan Review Training. And Rich, would you like to say a few opening comments about today's training and what you've been observing?
Well, you know, we've changed the process a little bit, and some questions have come up because, you know, different reviewers do things just a little bit different. So we've had a lot of questions, and this is kind of why we have decided to put this presentation on so people can actually speak with you, John, and get an idea for how you do your reviews.
All right. All right. Well, good. And yeah, we've been reviewing plans, I would say, for, well, actively with the city, contracted by the city, probably for the last year, maybe year and a half. But Rich was reviewing those plans before, and probably for the last 4 or 5 years, plans have been passing through you for post-construction. So why don't we start with just an overview of this, and I want to just make sure I can see you all, and in case we have questions. So if you do have questions this morning, there's a couple ways you can do it. One, we're a small enough group, so just unmute yourself and ask a question if you would like. There's also on Zoom a chat feature, and Jonah will be watching that, which, by the way, I should introduce Jonah Sonner. He's with WGR, and he also reviews plans for the City of Chico with WGR. And so most likely you'd be dealing with one of either of Jonah or myself when we're doing plan reviews. Typically, we'll stick with a plan. So if there's a resubmittal, typically if Jonah did the initial one, he'll do the follow-up, or I will too. But sometimes in the interest of time, if one of us is just, you know, got too much on our plate, we might pick up for one of the others. But we try to keep continuity with any particular project. So he'll be watching the chat this morning, and if you want to chat to just one of us or to everyone, go ahead and throw a question in there, and we'll field it when we see it. All right, so let's talk about these plan submittals. Let me. So there's this morning we're going to talk about the submittal requirements themselves, and that would be good to review because we do see some problems there typically where we're not getting everything we need. And so we want to go through what's expected as far as the submittal. And then I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on the review process and the review documentation and give you an idea of what we're really looking for in these submittals. And then we'll talk about some common problem areas. And then we're going to allow plenty of time to ask questions. So if you have a question in general about it, we'll field that. As far as specific site-specific questions, we may ask you to table that. In other words, we'd be happy to talk about that, but if it's not of general interest to everybody, then we may just have a follow-up conversation with you after today's meeting. So if it starts getting down too much into the detail or nitty-gritty of a particular site, we may just do an offline session with you on that. But again, if you have questions at any time, you can contact Rich, myself, or Jonah. We'd be happy to talk to you about that. So the first thing that needs to be submitted is this post-construction worksheet. And this is actually one of the appendices in the city's post-construction standards plan. And I'm going to actually bring that up onto the screen here, I think. Let's see. Maybe drag that over. All right, where did it go? I practiced all this before. Let me find it. Here it is. It's just hiding behind the screen. All right, Jonah, can you see that okay?
Yes, I do.
All right, good. So there's the different sections of this, and one of the things we ask is just complete this this form completely. and I'll show you there what might be applicable, what's not applicable. But sometimes we do get this worksheet submitted without this front summary sheet. So there's it's really important to get this for every project, whether you're a small or a regulated project, so that we know who to contact and what is some basic information about the project. So we only need one of these. That later on, you're going to see that there's a section of this form that we need for each DMA. But this front project summary sheet is just for each project. And then check which type of project you are. Are you a small? Well, if you're a small, that means you're under 5,000 square feet of new or replaced impervious surface. And we will be reviewing that differently than a regulated project, which is 5,000 square feet or more of new or replaced impervious surface. And we'll talk about this 50% redevelopment rule here in a moment, and then just provide basic information. But another thing here is, how many DMAs do you have, drainage management areas? Excuse me. Excuse me. So the next section of the worksheet is for those small projects. So as I mentioned, if you're between 2,500 square feet and 5,000 square feet of new or replaced impervious surface, then you are a small. And that's treated differently. It's less onerous. Basically, you just have to pick one of these design measures, and it will almost always be tree planting because trees are required in most projects. And then you need to use that calculator, that water balance calculator that was developed by the State Water Board. It's Appendix 5 of the Post-Construction Standards Plan, and basically just quantify the reduction. But one of the things about this is, at this time, the municipal stormwater permit that the city is subject to does not require a goal to be met for the small project. It basically just says pick a low impact development measure, one of these right here, these site design measures, pick one of them, quantify it, and give us the data for that quantification. But there's no goal to be met. As opposed to if you've used that very same calculator as a part of the State Water Board's construction general permit, and it's now incorporated into SMARTS. There is a goal to be met with that one, but for the small projects under the City of Chico's program, for their permit, you just have to pick one of those measures and quantify it. And right here, we summarize what's needed to meet that submittal. But basically, this sheet, that previous just project information sheet, and then a printout of that water balance calculator is all we need for a small project. And we don't, I think typically we don't review small projects. They're easy enough where Rich and his staff are reviewing those, so they don't even come to us. Regulated projects, though, is where we want to spend most of our attention on today. And so again, you complete that first page or two of basic site information, project information, but each drainage management area then is going to need this next section. So if you only have one DMA, then you just need one set. But sometimes we see, in fact, I think we're going to show you an example of one that has 14 DMAs. Then I need 14 sets of this, this next section. So you need to give us the name of the DMA, the square footage in that DMA, and then each one of these subsections are applied to that DMA. So here's another area where we see sometimes some confusion. It's about these source controls. Remember, this is for that particular DMA, and it may change from DMA to DMA at a project. For example, if we got an apartment complex going in, only one of the DMAs or maybe a couple of the DMAs will have the refuse area where the trash enclosure is located. So if it's in that DMA, then you would select yes for that one. If a certain DMA has no landscaping in it, then you would not select yes there. I probably should talk a little bit about this this source control section. This comes from the state water board's requirements. It comes right out of the municipal permit and what they were wanting to see in these post-construction design measures. Sometimes, you know, when we were developing this guidance document and, you know, basing it on the permit, it was a little bit frustrating because I felt like the water board was missing some of the point of the post-construction plan, is that it's really geared more towards, you know, new development and redevelopment. It's geared towards something you're building, not ongoing activities. And some of these source controls feel like ongoing activities. So, for example, spill control is in here, I think. Accidental spills or leaks right here. You know, how does that go into a design? You know, of course, a spill could happen anywhere at any time, really. So we don't get too over the top concerned about this. You know, if you have a large parking area, then maybe and it's feeding into an underground infiltration device, then maybe we're concerned about a spill of fuel or oil getting into the infiltration device, and we'd like to see some sort of spill control for that. Your design measure might be as simple as having a spill kit available, especially for like a commercial or industrial site, or a spill resource closet built into it. But we don't typically get too crazy about our reviews on that type of thing, especially if it's more like an ongoing activity thing. Interior floor drains, the only thing I'm looking at is that they're not tied into the stormwater system, but that would be against code anyways, typically speaking. Interior floor drains aren't to tie into a stormwater system. Sanitary sewer system, that's fine, or a wastewater system, that's fine, but not into the storm system. If you have a parking area, then you're selecting that. Again, pest control, to me, that's more an activity base. So typically, I'm not going to be too concerned whether you check that or not check it. If you have a pool, a spa, or a pond as a part of the design, then you want to check that. Or if you have a food service type of operation in a particular DMA. So sometimes we'll review like gasoline stations that have a convenience store with a food service part of it. If that C-store / food service area is in a certain DMA, then you would select it for that one. But if you have another DMA that is mostly the outward landscaping areas, then you would not select it for that DMA. But that's kind of our concept on these. I won't get into any more of that unless you have specific questions with that. The next section is really important to select is your soil type, your hydrologic soil group, or HSG. Basically, we want to see if it's an A, B, C, or D, or mixed use, mixed soil types on your site. If you have one soil type, then we need to know that. If there's multiple soil types, we need to know that, especially if they have different HSG types. So if part of the site is A and then part of it is C or D, that's going to be something we really take a look at, because of course we're going to want to see the infiltration or bioretention happening in the A type soils on that site rather than the C or D. And that's because the permit requires us to have infiltration occurring there. Now, when this permit came out, it's been out for a while now, maybe 8 years plus. We we thought this was going to be more of a big deal than it was. To be honest, most of the reviews that we've done, the sites are either all have the same HSG soil types, or the developers already put the infiltration into the higher infiltration area. So I have not found this to be an issue in most of our projects that we review. Now, another area that needs to be handled on a per DMA basis are the 9 LID, or what I like to say, essay questions. This comes right out of the permit. We were obligated by the permit to address these for new and redevelopment projects that are regulated or over 5,000 square feet. And so from the very beginning, we felt it was just best to deal with it by saying, okay, how are you addressing this? Again, I thought this would be a bigger issue in the reviews, but we have found it not to be a big deal at all. I don't know if I have rejected hardly any projects due to any of it. Sometimes it might be there's a question here about soil type. Sometimes it might be, well, I'm seeing something slightly different on the web soil survey than what you're saying here. Could you clarify? But typically, I haven't seen a lot of projects with problems answering these 9 questions adequately or with any real challenges in meeting it. So I won't spend a lot of time this morning covering this just because we haven't seen it be a problem unless you have a specific question. Now we move into the pre-development and post-development conditions. We need to know the percent impervious in both pre and post, your average runoff coefficient, and then what will be your peak flow rate pre-development and post-development. Now those questions, those peak flow rate questions, are going to be particularly important if your site has over 1 acre of impervious surface being added, not replaced. So if you're just replacing an acre or more of impervious surface, it doesn't kick in the hydro modification requirement. But if you are creating, maybe at a brand new site, creating over an acre of impervious surface, then the permit and the city's post-construction development standard says that the post-construction or post-development peak flow rate cannot exceed that of the pre for a 2-year 24-hour storm event. And you can find some information about the 2-year 24-hour storm event on the volumetric calculator on the last tab there. And this is, I should say, mitigated. One problem that we've seen on a few reviews is they'll give me the post-development peak flow rate, but before mitigation. In other words, what's going into the retention basin or the bioretention cell for that particular DMA. But I want to know what's leaving that cell for a 2-year 24-hour storm event, which oftentimes is nothing. It's 0 usually. So when you do give me that post-development number, make sure that is the mitigated number, what's actually leaving that DMA for a 2-year 24-hour storm event. And then this next section is where you select your treatment control measures. And you'll notice that under sizing criteria, we have flow or volume, or in some cases, both. I think down here for infiltration trenches or flow through planters. It's either or. That sizing criteria we refer to in the post-construction standards plan as a storm design volume, or SDV, or storm design flow rate, SDF. We'll talk about that more in a moment, but most projects we're looking at the volume, only if we're doing a flow through type of a situation. And we had one recently. In fact, I'm going to show that here in a moment. It's going to be SDF, which is 0.2 inches per hour will be our treatment goal. Now, under tree planning, we show that as being the SMARTS calculator, but it's also built into our volumetric calculator. So if you're calculating the volume goal, we ask a question about tree planting, and that will build into that goal the credits that you get for existing and new trees within that each DMA. And then there are certain variations and exceptions, and we will spend some time looking at this this morning. In fact, a common one that we see. We'll talk about that in a moment. But if any of those apply, then you would want to indicate that for that DMA here. And then there's a list of the submittal requirements, which we're going to look at next. So let me get back to our list of submittal requirements. And so you have that worksheet, but then along with the worksheet, we need a site plan or a set of plans. And the plans need to do several things. One is we need to be able to clearly see where your DMAs are. And then also, what is the treatment design that you're going to use in that DMA? So not only show the DMAs, but if you have bioretention cells, show where those are at. And it's helpful to include on the plans information about those cells that are going to be important to validate your calculations. For example, the bottom area of the infiltration cell, how big is that? So that we can calculate your infiltration rates and verify your calculations. We need to see your peak development flow rates and post-development flow rates. That's helpful on the maps. It doesn't absolutely have to be on the drawings. You can have a separate calculation for that. Areas of existing impervious surfaces and proposed areas of impervious surfaces. Generally, that's not a problem. Usually that's pretty standard, but just make it clear so we can understand what's vegetated, what's impervious on your drawings, so that we can, in fact, it's helpful many times to include the areas on your drawings so that we can quickly validate it against your calculations provided. Not too common, but it does happen, setbacks from creeks and wetlands or riparian habitats. And then show your existing topography and drainage patterns and your proposed topography and drainage patterns. Show your soil types. Again, that doesn't have to happen on the drawings themselves, but you do need to have information about that. And then show existing trees so that we can validate your credit, and new trees, and also areas to be protected. Now, sometimes with the trees too, it might be helpful to submit a landscape plan with that. But if you do that, especially if you have multiple DMAs, make sure that the DMAs are drawn out on the landscaping plan, or you show the trees on the DMA plan, so that we can count up the number of trees within each DMA, both existing and new. All right. And so your design drawings should just provide enough information so that we can see the area, so your plan view, but also your elevation, or more importantly, like a cross section if you have a lot of underground structure going in. So if you have an infiltration trench that is going in there, I need to know what's the depth and the width of the trench, and how much rock layer is in there, how much soil is on top of that, especially if it's a bioretention area, and how much ponding is on top of that. I need to see your elevations of your drain inlets so that I can verify that you do have that ponding. If you have a sub drain in your design, you need to show that and what elevation that's at in that. So we can just verify the volumes that are being captured. And then all of your drawings need to just be stamped by the appropriate professional licensed individual. The volumetric calculator, let's take a look at that. You need to provide a printout of that, and let's take a quick look at some of the features of this. Again, one of these per DMA, so you give us the DMA name right here, and then you'll enter the size of the DMA. And notice, in fact, just this morning I was reviewing one for somebody, not with the City of Chico, another city, but they put in here the square footage rather than reading carefully. We want the percent impervious area right here. This is where you would enter your trees. And as far as the credits that we allow here, we basically took the same credits that the water board has on their water balance calculator used on smarts. Unfortunately, I can't really document where they got those values because smarts and the water board haven't really disclosed that, where they've gotten those values, but we're using the same values that the state water board uses. Now, how this volumetric calculator works is it's based on weather data, and the process that's described in the city's municipal permit allowed a couple different approaches to be taken to determine this, and I'll go through that in a moment. But one of them was using weather data and using the 85th percentile storm. And what we noticed that in the Central Valley, as we went from north to south, it was almost a linear relationship. And so we do give you some of the raw data, the Reading graph, the Sacramento graph, and then the Fresno graph. And as we looked at these 85th percentiles, it was almost a linear relationship. And so what we did was we built that into the calculator based on your position, your relative position north and south of Sacramento, kind of as a bird flies. Now, it does, there's a certain tolerance to this. So, 5, 10, even 20 miles isn't going to make much of a difference. So you just need to get close. So don't get too detailed about this. You can play around with it too and see it doesn't make much difference. But a project occurring in Chico certainly has a different goal than a project occurring in Sacramento or one that's occurring in Fresno. And so you will designate your position, which will, for Chico, will always be north, obviously, and your distance from Sacramento, and I'm trying to blank, but I want to say it's like 60 miles roughly north of Sacramento. And so you enter that in, and that's going to give us our percent of distance. And basically what that's doing is going off of these runoff coefficients off of those curves that we were looking at. So you can see the linear transition for each runoff coefficient here with each of the weather station, and we get our unit basin storage off of that based off of, let's say, this graph right here, unit basin storage for the different runoff coefficients. You can see where we're getting that. And you can see that, Reading will have the highest, Fresno has the lowest, but we also have the 4 different curve numbers we're working with here. And so what this does is based on what you say here, and also based on, let's say, a runoff coefficient of, let's say 0.6 is a common one we see. That would give a 0.47. And let me just populate this with some dummy data. Let's say 30,000 square feet, and let's say their There got 23,000 square feet of impervious surface being added. And let's just throw in, a dozen trees or so. And let's see, did I miss something here? Oh, I did the very same mistake. Let's just say I did the same mistake the guy did this morning. 75%. There we go. And so why the two numbers? Well, the municipal permit allows two different approaches to doing this. One is using the CASCA BMP handbook approach, which is using all of this weather data. And the other is using the urban runoff quality management approach, which is using basically the percent imperviousness. Now, we have noticed that different projects based on where they're at in the state and how much impervious area they have, one approach might be advantageous at times and the other approach might be more advantageous at times. And because the permit allows either approach to be used, we're like, okay, let's give the developer just the choice to use whichever one's more beneficial. And so in this case, obviously the first one's going to be more beneficial. So you just say use this one and you say don't use this one. And basically you would take a screen print or print with a DMA, maybe DMA number 1 here. And this would be your printout for that would accompany your worksheets. And this would be your SDV right here. 1,112 cubic feet would be your SDV for that particular DMA. So that's how this volumetric calculator works. We did include some more information as a final tab here, more to support the hydro modification goal. And so you can look up your 2-year 24-hour value by just clicking on this NOAA website and find your location and actually pinpoint it and come up with a site-specific 2-year 24-hour intensity.
John, I think the NOAA Atlas hasn't been working for a while.
Oh, I haven't noticed that.
It might be working now. I haven't checked, but last time we've checked, it's been the site's been down.
Yeah, apparently the data center got flooded out, so all their computers and systems were down.
Yeah, we've seen that from time to time with other federal programs. So there are other sources, even counties. Lots of times Butte County probably has hydrologic data that you can use. Or typically too, for calculating SDF, actually you're allowed to use 2 times the 2-year 24-hour intensity or 0.2 inches per hour. And yeah, you're right, it's down. So, okay, well, thanks for bringing that to my attention. I didn't realize that. But for Chico, 2 times the 2-year 24 hours, usually going to be above 0.2. And because you're given the ability to use 0.2 inches per hour, that's going to be a more advantageous figure for you anyways. As you move further south in the Central Valley, like the Fresno area, 2 times the 2-year 24 hours actually going to be below 0.2. So they would want to actually use the actual 2-year 24-hour number. But for you, you're going to be probably better served by just using 0.2. But yeah, I'll look into that. I didn't know about that. I'll see if I can find another source or find out when it's going to be back online. All right, good. Let me go back to our what we're looking for as far as submittal requirements. So how we prepared this post-construction standards plan guidance is basically we put the onus on the professional engineer. I'm just there to make sure that all the boxes that need to be checked are checked, that your application is complete. that I'm getting the same number for the SDV as you are, or the SDF, and that your calculations and your drawings are supporting that. But, you know, I typically will not question the professional engineer if you say that, for example, the voids in your soil or your rock is 40%, then, and you've stamped that, then we're going with 40%. The only time I'll question it is if it seems to be completely in error or not supported by other information, or it's a typo or something like that. But if it's within the realm of reason, you're the one stamping it, you're the professional signing it, we're going to go with that for that type of thing. So typically, I'm not questioning your design. I'm just looking at what you've submitted and making sure that it is adding up, both what's on the drawings, what's in the calculations, and that you've provided us all the information that we need. And then one of the other things we need, as we'll talk about in a moment, that's often forgotten or not submitted, is the operation and maintenance plan and the statement of responsibility. And you can see that here, right here. So it's Appendix 9, and it's a form as well. And then the statement of responsibility. Now, sometimes the statement of responsibility does not need to actually be submitted, and that's for a case where the city is going to have the responsibility for the maintenance of that, or going to take ownership of that treatment device, especially if it is going to be deeded over to the city or is in the city right away. Then and a maintenance agreement is going to be, or a maintenance district is going to be applied to that, then that will typically be the case. You just need to let us know that. I will verify that with Rich, and then we'll consider that section met. All right. So let's talk about the review criteria now. So as I mentioned, my first job is just to look and see if the application is complete. Do I have all the pieces I need to be able to evaluate it? Was the O&M plan submitted? You are charged for each of these, and maybe Rich can talk more about that. I don't know all the details of that, how that works. But you're charged for each review, or at least we charge Rich for each review. So if I see right from the start that something's not complete, I will typically not even review it and send it back to Rich, not charge Rich. You know, if I see that the O&M plan's not there, I'm stopping the review right there. I'm not charging Rich for it. Therefore, hopefully you don't get charged for it. And we're just coming back and saying, hey, you forgot to submit the O&M plan. And, you know, why charge you for a review that we don't need to charge you for? So we want to make sure that it's just complete. The next thing we're looking at is at the DMAs. Were the DMAs defined correctly? Generally speaking, they are. Occasionally, I will find a project submitted that the DMAs don't really make sense. Now, DMAs, as we define them here, sometimes are a little bit different than how engineers would define drainage areas for like sizing pipe or the hydraulics of the site. Typically, what we're looking at as a DMA definition is a place where water leaves the site. So if there's one place that water leaves the site, that is going to be usually indicative of one DMA, not always. But also we're looking at what kind of treatment devices are in that. So if we have one treatment device, let's say the entire site goes into a retention basin, and that retention basin has a drain inlet that is elevated. So once it meets capacity, then it drains. That's going to be one DMA. But if another site has, you know, two or more bioretention areas, that then tie into the drainage system that ties into the municipal or MS4 drainage system, then that will usually be multiple DMAs. Each one of those bioretention areas will probably be a separate DMA that includes the bioretention and everything that feeds into that cell. Will usually be that. Sometimes I'll see like someone will say the building's one DMA, but then those roof drains are feeding off in different directions. And that would be an example where we would turn it back and go, no, you know, half the building's going over to this side, which is going into landscaping, and the other half of the building's going to the north side, that's going into a hard pipe roof drain tying into the drainage system. That's going to be a separate DMA. So we don't have too many problems with that, but you might watch that. Then the next thing we'll check is which type of sizing criteria was used for each DMA. Now, here's another reason why a DMA might get separated. It might be that one treatment system, a biocell, for example, a bioretention cell, is going to be typically volumetric, where maybe the roof drain's going to the north side is going into a grassy swale, and that's going to be typically a flow based. And so it's going to be an SDF. And so if you're using different design criteria, that is going to definitely mean it's two different DMAs. So we want to make sure too that the SDV and SDF were appropriately chosen. I'm actually going to show you an interesting project today where they used both and both were met. And then the other thing we're looking at is not just was it sized correctly, is the SDV being met or the SDF being met, but can that SDV dissipate within 48 hours? That's the goal. And so it needs to infiltrate or dissipate within 48 hours. Now, if there's soils that don't allow infiltration to occur of the SDV in 48 hours, then you may use one of the alternate designs, which we'll talk about in a moment, and that is identified in the plan, and which is usually a subdrain. We'll also check to see if the hydro modification goal was required and if it was met, and that's like I was mentioning, 1 acre or more of soil impervious area being added, not replaced, but added. Then we're going to look at that 0.2 inches per hour, the peak flow rate for that 0.2 inches per hour pre and post, and the post can't exceed the pre. And then, of course, we're going to look at the O&M plan to make sure that it's adequate. One of the biggest problems I see with the O&M plans is that they don't account for the long-term performance of especially infiltration devices. So we want to make sure or have criteria for both inspection and maintenance of what happens when that infiltration device plugs up, which will probably happen over, who knows, years or decades. It won't probably, in most circumstances, infiltrate as it did when it was first installed throughout the, years. At some point, it'll probably start to plug up. What do you do in that case? And so we want to see that built into the O&M plan. Because how those plans are used and the statement of responsibility is used is that the city has a requirement that once a year, they need to send out a self-certification card, basically a postcard, to the owners of these devices to ask 3 questions. 1, are these treatment devices that were built into the project, are they still there? 2, are you inspecting them as you said you would in your O&M plan? And then 3, are they performing as designed? And as long as you answer yes, 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 then that's good, and you won't see another card until next year. But 20, 25 years down the road, maybe it starts to plug up. then if that is the case, then it's going to be expected that the owner of that property then take the maintenance that was spec'd out by the professional who designed it, as far as what's needed. As we see it as real important to your clients to tell them of basically the maintenance expectations. This isn't something that you just put in the ground and forget. Yeah, maybe you can forget about it for 5 years, a decade, or even more. But at some point, just like blacktop asphalt, you're going to have to replace it or maintain it or change it. So it will have a life expectancy, and so that needs to be communicated to your client. All right, so let's look at now 4 different reviews I do, and I want to just check on questions. Anybody have a question before we move on? All right, and let me double check something here. How we're doing on time? All right, I think we're doing okay on time. Let's take a look at these. So again, if you have to sign off because of time, we are recording this, so you could always come back and watch a recorded version of this. So let's look at a infiltration trench that had both SDV and SDF in it. And this is a very recent project that we've been working on. So notice that it has 1 DMA. So if I go to, first off, let's take a look at how we do this documentation. So for any submittal you get, you're going to get the spreadsheet submitted back to you with some basic information about your project. Plus, we're doing our own independent verification of your calculations, and just hopefully that we can come up with the same number that you did. But let me just explain some of the information that you'll see on here. So just some obvious basic information about your site. Project area. Now, what we do, now this site only has 1 DMA. You'll see some here in a moment have multiple DMAs. One of the things we're doing is we'll take this off of your project summary sheet, but then when we enter each DMA, we're actually entering the area of each DMA on this one here. And then usually when we have multiple DMAs, we'll have a summary sheet and we'll check the sum of the DMA areas and check it against your total area and see how that correlates. There's oftentimes it doesn't correlate, that they're not identical. So that tells us either we have a typo, which does happen actually quite often, or why it's relevant is, okay, some areas of the project weren't factored into the DMAs. Why is that? Is it because they're a de minimis area, or is it because they were missed? Usually if there's a difference between this number here and what we see on the single DMA or on the summary sheet, then we're usually asking questions. Why is the number different? So you might pay attention to that. And if the number is different for a good reason, then bring that out to our attention, tell us why. Now, if it is a de minimis area, I'll show you how we deal with that and actually create it as a DMA, as a de minimis DMA. For example, what am I talking about? Well, a driveway that has a crown and everything just goes off of a concrete area to the street, but it's within the project. You have no opportunity to treat that water. You know, that 300 square feet is just flows off, sheet flows off, and you don't have the ability to treat that. Well, I still need to take that into account in the overall project numbers, but as you'll see here, we do provide some allowances for situations like that, and what we want to see is that the aggregate SDV, the aggregate treatment for the site is equal or greater than the aggregate SDV. And I'll show you an example of that here in a moment. But we do take, that number is pretty important. Your existing impervious area and your post-impervious area, that's going to help us determine if hydro modification is required. Now, if it's a white cell, that's something I enter. If it's a blue cell, not white cell, then that's a calculation. And so we're basically looking at this new impervious area and determining, no, it's not a hydromod project. This is over 5,000 square feet, therefore it is a regulated project. And what is this about, percent of existing? Well, this is where we're looking at the 50% rule. So if the new impervious area is 50% or less than the existing impervious area, then we only have to treat the new addition, not the entire DMA. So if that number is 50% or less, then I only have to treat the new area, not the entire DMA. And we've seen quite a few projects come through where they were providing treatment for the entire DMA, and I was saying, well, actually, you're a little bit overkill here. We can actually downsize this project because this is your actual treatment goal. All right, and then just some information about the contact for the owner and the engineering firm. And then we're saying, okay, were the source controls adequate? Soil types, were they correctly identified? Were the 9 LID measures properly addressed? And then what about the hydromodification goal? Here I said does not apply to this project because less than 1 acre of impervious surface is being constructed. O&M plan adequate, yes or no? And if it's not, then typically, if there's a problem, I'm going to put it in red and give some information about that. And then as it goes through different reviews, we keep track of it as far as what's needed and what needs to happen here. And because this has one DMA, let's take a look at this. Now, this one was unique. This is pretty rare that I have both an SDV and an SDF. I think the developer here, or the engineer here in this case, was meaning to do the SDF initially. However, when they submitted the information, it was looking more like they were giving me information for SDV. So I calculated the SDV and found they were just a skosh off on meeting their goal. And so I sent back a comment saying, okay, you're just slightly under on the SDV. They go, no, we were trying to do the SDF. And so I took their numbers, looked at what they were presenting, and again, they were just slightly off, even with the SDF. So that was kind of interesting because this was my first real live example where we were looking at both, and I was finding that both were kind of correlating very similarly. So when they altered their design, just slightly upsized it, not only did they meet the SDF goal, they met the SDV goal too. So I actually calculated both here using the numbers they provided. And you can actually see here that the volumetric goal had a slight surplus, and the flow through was met. So that was kind of an interesting project. So you will get this returned to you documentation with either how you met it, or if there's a question or a problem, I will typically highlight whatever cells are in question in red, and then you'll have some review notes here about what I'm looking for. All right, so let me put that one away, and let's take a look at a bioretention one with 3 DMAs. So again, I won't go through all of this here, but just like you said, let's take a look at these DMAs here. So many times I will also clip in a cross section or supporting information into it just to further document what was done. But you'll notice that we have the DMA area, the impervious area, the percentage for that. And then I plug this in from the calculator, the volumetric calculator. So usually you'll give me a printout of that, and so I'll take that number off of there. I don't necessarily do it every time, but if I have a reason to double check a number, I might do my own water balance calculator, Excel spreadsheet, and send. If I do that, then, and especially if there was some sort of discrepancy, I might send that back with the review documentation. Or sometimes I do that because I see an advantage to the developer. I go, well, I can clearly see trees in this DMA. You know, I see them on the plans, but they didn't account for them. And so I might add in the trees for you, especially if your numbers are just a little bit off. I might actually add in the trees. And there's been times where what the engineer submitted was actually a little bit inadequate, but by noticing other things, like another thing that sometimes gets left out is self-treating areas. Like you have a landscape area, which I know is, you know, you have at least 3 inches of good soil underneath that landscape area. I can actually add that in and get you a little bit more credit if I notice you're just slightly off. So if sometimes I'll do that and add in the water balance calculator as just further documentation of our review. Infiltration rate, let's talk about this for a moment here. Now this is infiltration rate of 1 inch per hour is reasonable for A soil. I probably had this comment here. I don't remember exactly for this submittal. So if you're on the line and you gave it to me, please forgive me. I'm not remembering right now if that was given. But sometimes that infiltration rate's not provided. But if they said HSGA soil, and let's say I'm going to turn this to a 0 right now. So you notice here, this volume infiltrated in 48 hours. It needs to be greater than this 1316. And so I might go, well, they didn't give me that, but it's an A soil. I know it's at least, oops, not 11, 1 inch per hour. Okay, that's above 1856 is above 1316. All right, we'll just go with that. I might put that in red and say, please verify that this is the case or provide me the actual. Now, if you're in a D soil and you're saying 1 inch or more, I might say, please provide a soils report or something to substantiate that 1 inches per hour in your D soil. Also note that this infiltration rate here is the native soils, or it's the soils underneath your infiltration device, be it a bioretention or an infiltration trench. We're looking at your ability to dissipate water within 48 hours. We're not looking at how fast will water move through your treatment device, you know, through the sand layer or the rock layer. You know, that by definition in the plan has to be at least 5 inches per hour, and as long as you go with engineered soils, it should be. But we're more, okay, can you dissipate this SDV within 48 hours? And if you can't, that's not the end of the story. That means we might be able to do something creative with that. Now, notice that if they have an underdrain here, now this one was a little bit different, but if you have an underdrain in there and you can't meet that 48 hours, that underdrain is going to be allowed. But if you, let's say you're in A soils and you can easily meet that, then we're not going to want to see an underdrain that is tied right into the municipal system, because that's kind of, in our minds, a hole in the bucket, and you're short-circuiting your ability to treat that SDV. By the way, Jonah, I've been hogging this whole thing. You do a lot of reviews too, so I want to, you know, just let you make comment too. So feel free to interrupt me. I should have said that quite a bit ago.
No, you're fine.
All right, and so we're just basically taking these numbers out of your plans. That's why I said you need to provide us these numbers so we can clearly see them and put them into into ours. And also, this here in the blue, calculated treatment volume, is what I'm calculating. And this is coming out of your plan, so we enter this based out of your calculations. And here I actually came up with a little bit more credit than this developer reported, and that's good as long as it's equal or greater. My calculations of yours, we're going to say, all right, that's good. And so each DMA we do that for. And then on the summary, in this case, we had 3 DMAs. Here's the SDVs for each DMA, the treatment provided. Notice that there's a surplus for each of them. Let's take a look at another one where we might not have had a surplus. I think that's the last one. Before we get there, here's the one with the alternate design. Yes. All right. So here's a case where we had D soils, low infiltration rates, and notice that in 48 hours, they were below the SDV. So that means we can allow this to be installed. Because of the low infiltration rates, this is allowed alternate design. So you want to make sure you've also checked that on your worksheet. We showed that earlier, but that is an allowed alternate design because the SDV cannot be dissipated in 48 hours. So this brings up an important point. Many times we get asked the question, well, we're on soils that can't infiltrate anything. You know, do we really need to meet the SDV? Well, yes, you do, but you're allowed an alternate design to off-water that. And so you can have those subdrains. So, okay, not much is going to go into the native soils, but once this saturates in ponds, then it's going to take it off-site. And so you can either have this or you can have an elevated drain inlet. In fact, you can use the elevated drain inlet even for a site that does allow it to infiltrate in 48 hours, because what that means is that drain inlet is then above your SDV volume. And so any flows that exceed the SDV then go into the drain inlet and offsite. And yeah, the same for all 3 of these. And so in this case too, each DMA had a surplus. And so it was met. This last one here that we're going to cover today, before we go into questions, I think is actually.
Yeah, I know this one.
You know this one, huh? Yeah. So it's actually we're still working on this one. But I did want to bring this up because it has a de minimis. And I believe it was DMA 14 we threw it into. Yes. So this is a good example of what we might do on a review. In this case, no treatment was proposed for this DMA. But in this DMA, when I looked at it, I noticed that they had 12,900 square feet of sod, basically, or landscaping. So I said, okay, what if that was on just 3 inches of good soil? And so we put that in, a 1/4 foot of good soil with even a fairly low porosity, 20%. And so doing that just with our landscaped area on that, notice no ponding or anything like that, no gravel layer. So just a self-treating area. We actually came up with a treatment volume of 645 cubic feet. And that was because in this DMA, it had the ability to do that. As I mentioned earlier, you could have a DMA that's really small, that's basically a driveway, and there's no ability to treat anything. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But you'll notice that the SDV for this is 987, but the treatment, in fact, they were saying 0 initially, but I using this, came up with 645, so at least partial treatment. So if we go to the summary, this is basically what I wanted to show. they were showing a surplus in all their DMAs except this last de minimis DMA, which was right on the, in fact, if we come down here, you see DMA 14 right along the street, not a lot of opportunity to do treatment except the self-treated areas with the landscape. So that actually had a negative value for that DMA, but aggregate, the aggregate SDV is 17,300 cubic feet, and the treatment provided is 20,600. So they're more than treating the goal, and they have an aggregate surplus of almost 3,300 square feet, or I'm sorry, cubic feet. So we accepted that. Now there are some municipalities that get very over the top about every DMA being met, but we felt that this is protective of water quality, that this meets the goals of the municipal permit, and City of Chico accepts this. But you can see, you know, in this particular one, this is a good DMA map. It shows the infiltration devices, it shows the DMA locations, and then we have a good cross section. So they gave us lots of good information to be able to do this. Now, if I do something like this, typically I will turn it back and say, please verify, you know, I will say, you know, I conceptually recalculated it this way, but please verify if this is the case. And, you know, even if I'm giving you favorable credit, I want you to go back and verify that that is acceptable, because you're the professional, you're the one stamping it. All right. So again, common problems. The number one problem that we turn it back for is the SDV or the SDF were not met, or were not correctly identified and not met. The hole in the bucket, that's another common one, is where the alternate design wasn't allowed and a subdrain was put in. The infiltration of native soils was not provided. That's really important because we need to be able to verify that you're dissipating in 48 hours. Another one is hydro modification goal was not realized that it was something that needed to be met, or was not addressed at all, or was not met. And then probably the other reasons we turn it back is just not enough information was provided for us to be able to kind of independently validate your numbers. And then the O&M plan or statement of responsibility was not provided or was incomplete for some reason. So if you have questions at any time, you can contact me or Jonah. We're happy to talk to you. If we're doing the review, you're going to get our contact information, and you can call Chris or Rich at the city first if you want, or call us if you have questions. Now, we do ask that all submittals go first to the city and that they send them to us. We found that it causes confusion when developers start sending them straight to us. So we ask that you go straight to the city first, and then they'll direct it to us. Rich, anything you want to bring out? Something you heard in our presentation, or something you want to bring up?
Yeah, John, well, you pretty much nailed it, but I would like to add that on the O&M plans, we record those against the property. So we do need to obtain a title report, and if it's not held by an individual, we'll need the articles of incorporation. And then for the development projects that are going through the development part of the city, our development engineer is going to start requiring, as part of the soils report, that you do an infiltration test. So we actually have the real numbers. That's about it.
Okay, if you want any information, take a screen print of that, or just shoot that screen right now with your camera, and email me. I can email you a copy of notes from today. So we have a PDF copy of the slides we just covered. I can email you if you're missing some of the worksheets or something like that, or the calculators, I can send those to you. So if you're just needing some information, send me an email, and I'd be happy to do that. Any questions? General questions? Again, we don't want to dive too much into a specific site, but maybe for illustration purposes, you have a site you want to talk about.
Yeah, John, I want to follow up a little bit with that 2-year, 24-hour storm requirements. I want to make sure I'm understanding it well. What was the difference between the, can you briefly go over that 2 times the 2-year, 24-hour, or you said 0.2 inches per hour?
Yes.
Are those values that you came up with the permit
Yes,
process?
let me do something here. I don't. This isn't the city's official one, but it's just the one I had handy here. Cities looks just like this. Sorry, Rich. I should have had your official one up and ready to go. But let me get down to the treatment because it talks about it in here. Volumetric calculations and flow-based right here. So right here's what I was talking about. Now this is Reading, and Chico's going to be similar, maybe not identical, but similar. And so you're allowed to go, and if you pull up the cities and go to section 5.4.3, it'll talk about flow-based criteria, and it gives you 2 options. And the reason we gave you 2 options is because our permit gave us 2 options. It said you can either use 0.2 inches per hour or 2 times the 85th percentile storm. And so I show Reading. Chico's not going to be too much different from that, but you notice 2 times 0.13 is 0.26. So that would actually be a higher goal to meet than 0.2. So that's why I said in Chico, even though the calculator's offline right now, you'd probably go with 0.2 anyways, because it's going to be more favorable for you. Does that help?
Okay, that makes sense. Now going back to the volume based with the I believe it's if your project's over an acre. I think it's in section 5.
About the
and you
hydro,
have the
the
your
hydro
post
modification goal?
construction.
Yes, yes. It's right here. So next page, I believe. Right here. Basically,
Yeah, here we go.
yeah. If you are creating 1 acre or more of impervious surface, then you have your post peak flow rate has to be equal or less than your pre-development peak flow rate for that DMA, or for each DMA that applies to. So, you would go look up the 2-year 24-hour for your area and calculate your peak flow rate for that DMA that applies to that, and compare that your post to your pre. And your post mitigated cannot be greater than your pre. So your post might be greater because you're adding a bunch of asphalt, but it's going into a bioretention area, and maybe that bioretention area is able to capture 100% of a 2-year 24-hour event, and therefore your peak flow rate for a 2-year 24-hour event is going to be 0 for that DMA. So you've met it.
What if you have an underdrain? pipe.
If you have an under drain, then what I've seen people do is include a orifice and provide calculations on that then.
Okay. So that 24-hour, that's not the 24-hour intensity number. Like if you went to the Atlas, assuming it was working, they have just this little list of all the intensities per time interval and return period.
Right, they have intensity and they have volume. You're right. Well, you can use whichever figure you want, but basically you need to, what we're really looking at though is your peak flow rate based on your time of concentration for your particular DMA. So however you want to get to that, I'm not so concerned whether you use volume or intensity, but it's how you determine it.
Okay. Okay, that answers my question.
All right. Any other questions? Keith, I know you got questions. You always got questions for me. Are you still there?
Yeah, not today, I guess.
Not today, huh? Keith and I go way back. We've had lots of discussions. All right. Go ahead.
I have a quick question for Rich. This is Josh again. With the O&M plan, a lot of times our project, or at least for the project you were just seeing, the developer, the ownership switches hands after the project is submitted or is approved, or we have permits. So it's kind of a catch-22 if we like, because I can't provide a
Sure. No, I understand. Give us the title report and everything for the current owner. We put a hold on the certificate of occupancy. So if it does change, which it does happen, we find that out, and then we can go to the current owner and get a new title report and deal with that. But we have a catch on it, so if it does change ownership, we still get what we need. So just supply information for the current owner, and we'll go with it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, good. Any other questions? Well, I'm sure you will have questions for when you're actually doing a site. Feel free to contact me. I do occasionally, I don't mind answering a quick question. Obviously we're a consultant, so we don't want to do your design work. But if it's just a quick question, we have a saying around here: advice is free over coffee. So just say, John, pour yourself a cup of coffee. I got a quick question, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that. So good. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and end the meeting. All right, Rich. Well, thank you for letting us present today, and thank you everybody for joining today. And I look forward to reviewing your next projects. So, all right, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome, sir.